Hey there, friend. Brian with BrianHurtAudio.com here. When it comes to your voice recording, have you ever wondered, how do I even start to know how to improve or correct the sound in my voice recording? What am I even listening for? Well, you've come to the right place, my friend. That's exactly what I want to show you today. 3 steps that show you a way to listen that will guide you on how to go about improving your voice recording. And not just voice recordings. These principles could apply to your whole music mix or even to masters. Then, your recordings will compare very favorably to professional recordings and won't be quickly turned off from sounding amateur or from distracting audio problems. Let's get right into those 3 steps. But before we jump in, since we're talking about learning how to start improving your voice or vocal recording, I'd like to give you a completely free 15-page guide that will teach you to translate 4 common problems heard in pre-recorded voice or vocal recordings to simple audio corrections. All that just using basic music production software and some carefully chosen free plugins that I've already tested for you. Just go to BrianHurtAudio.com/guide. BrianHurtAudio.com/guide. And I think this will be a really big help to you to start improving your voice or vocal recordings right away. And you're going to easily start correcting some of these common problems I address in the guide. All right, let's continue on and dive into those 3 steps I mentioned to learn how to start listening in a new way. So our first big step or idea is, what do we listen with to begin listening in a whole new way? And the answer is something familiar. That'd be familiar headphones or speakers. And it would really help if they are your best ones, quality-wise. So why use something you're familiar with? Well, you're trying to train your ears to get used to listening on that same setup or in that same space if you're using speakers. Listening over and over again on those same headphones is going to train your ears, and you'll get used to what good and bad sounding recordings sound like on those. So it could be something like your best and most familiar headphones, or it could be your best speaker and listening space. A word about speakers is sound bounces around in the little square rooms, that we tend to have in most homes. They're not real conducive to sound. And the sound bounces around and deteriorates or degrades the sound. And these are called room modes. Something wonderful about headphones is that they take the room problem totally out of the equation when you put the headphones on. So I would strongly suggest using headphones if you're just starting out for learning to listen, for correcting audio, because they don't have that issue with room modes. So why is it a good idea to make your most familiar playback setup also your best in quality? And that's just so we can hear a better representation of the full range of sound when you're comparing. For example, earbuds. The little tiny earbuds, they're not going to be able to represent the lower frequencies like a larger set of headphones will typically. Typically, earbuds will roll off around 100 hertz, whereas the larger speakers or headphones, they're not, and roll off just means decrease in volume gradually. The larger headphones will not have that decrease in volume there as dramatically. And so you're going to hear a more full sound, and you can test that yourself. Listen to some dialogue on earbuds, then switch over to your larger headphones. You'll hear like, wow, on the earbuds, it's kind of mid-range sounding or tinny, whereas it sounds more full on the larger headphones. And so you want to practice, to start listening in a new way, practice listening to good sounding dialogue and music on your preferred playback setup. And that's going to train your ears on those headphones or speakers. A story about me trying to put this into practice was I invested in some good but not crazy expensive headphones between $150 to $200. And now with these, because I've become familiar with them, I can check any recording of my own or someone else's in any room, and I'm able to get a good idea of where that recording stands quality-wise, real quickly. And you don't even have to have headphones like mine. They could be lower priced, which would be lower quality headphones will work, so long as you spend the time listening on them and comparing back and forth. You'll still be able to hear what a good sounding reference should sound like compared to your own recording. And you'll be able to hear differences and use those to improve your recording. And if you're interested in the exact model of headphones that I'm using, they're called Beyerdynamic DT880 Pro. Beyerdynamic DT880 Pros. And I can leave a link down below if that's something that'd be helpful to you. But again, you can use less expensive headphones and do just fine. So for our second step, now that we know what to listen with, our next step is to listen by comparing, or to let comparison guide your listening. And this is after we volume match, of course. So we're comparing our recording to our reference recording, voice or full mixes, and we're listening very focused to hear what sounds the same or different when listening back to a short section of the reference recording against our recording. So what sounds different between them, or what sounds the same? And of course, like I mentioned, we're going to need to volume match before we start comparing, or else we're not going to be able to make any kind of helpful comparison at all, because our ears are going to be fooled into thinking the louder recording sounds better. And I've done a whole video on that I hope can help you out. Here's a link to that video here about how to volume match, and I'll leave a link below as well. So we are going to compare back and forth after we're volume match our recording to the reference, our good sounding reference recording. So listen carefully and even close your eyes when you listen. That may sound strange, but there really is something to this. There's something with our computer screens and all the flashing lights that it's difficult to really listen on these differences that are going to be subtle usually. They're not going to be massive differences. And so, yeah, I would encourage you. It helps me tremendously to close my eyes, and there is just something about that where I'm totally focusing on the sense of hearing and no eyes involved. That helps me to hear, oh, there's a difference, or this one actually sounds better. So yeah, listen back and forth to a short section of your audio, and then a short section of your good sounding reference recording. This could be dialogue or a full mix, and ask yourself, try to hear what sounds different between my voice recording and the reference recording. And then you would take notes and write those down. Maybe it sounds thin or dull, your recording, compared to the reference recording, just not as full or not as clear. Or, maybe the S's in your recording are just killing your ears. Write that down. Or maybe they both sound, similar, nice and full. And you can clearly hear the low and high frequencies and all those types of things. So you're going to use that good reference recording and the notes that you take from your comparison to guide any changes that you're going to make. I'll show you in upcoming videos. And that reference recording, it's so important because it keeps us in the ballpark of what a good voice recording or mix should actually sound like. If we're just listening to our own in isolation, our own recording, we don't really know where we're at. It's kind of flying blind. So that voice recording is just the guide that keeps us in the ballpark. And with these notes that we're taking down, we're going to aim for our voice recording after we learn how to make changes. We're going to aim for it to sound somewhat similar to our good sounding reference recording. So let's go ahead and do that with these examples that you see here, these two. I'll play through a small section of my recording, which is this one on the top. This is a reference recording. I'll play through a section of my recording and then the same section back to back really closely several times, and go ahead and close your eyes and just listen really closely to see what sounds different between them. So I'll do it several times, as close together as possible to really make a good comparison. Okay, so we'll start with mine, and these are already volume matched. Here we go. Collapse frequently occurs after serious accidents. It can be foretold generally because the skin is cool and clammy, and it is usually accompanied with vomiting or rapid pulse, irregular breathing or sighing, and the eyelids may be heavy, the pupils and the mind is not active.
Collapse frequently occurs after serious accidents. It can be foretold generally because the skin is cool and clammy, and it is usually accompanied with vomiting or rapid pulse, irregular breathing or sighing, and the eyelids may be heavy, the pupils dilated, and the mind is not active. Insensibility
Or collapse frequently occurs after serious accidents. It can be foretold generally because the skin is cool and clammy, and it is usually accompanied with vomiting or rapid pulse, irregular breathing or sighing, and the eyelids may be heavy, the pupils dilated, and the mind is not active. Insensibility
collapse frequently occurs after serious accidents. It can be foretold generally because the skin is cool and clammy, and it is usually accompanied with vomiting or rapid pulse, irregular breathing or sighing, and the eyelids may be heavy, the pupils dilated, and the mind is not active.
Shock or collapse frequently occurs after serious accidents. It can be foretold generally because the skin is cool and clammy, and it is usually accompanied with vomiting or rapid pulse, irregular breathing or sighing, and the eyelids may be heavy, the pupils dilated, and the mind is not active.
Collapse frequently occurs after serious accidents. It can be foretold generally because the skin is cool and clammy, and it is usually accompanied with vomiting or rapid pulse, irregular breathing or sighing, and the eyelids may be heavy, the pupils dilated, and the mind is not active.
Okay, so we heard those, and some of the differences that I was hearing between those two recordings were my recording here, this one, my voice recording. It just didn't sound as clear to me as the reference recording. There's maybe some background noise in there. It didn't seem to have those upper frequencies, as many of those upper frequencies that kind of give clarity to the sound as the reference recording here. It just didn't sound as focused overall. You may have been able to hear some kind of a sound of the room, basically. That's the reverberations of the room in my recording that kind of take away from the clarity, as opposed to this one just sounded really clear. I didn't hear any of those room tones or reverberations in that recording. And so we would write those differences down, that you hear, then those are going to guide our changes as we move into correcting our voice recording on other videos. Now to our third and final step. When you're trying to improve your vocal recording, you know what to listen with now, and you know that your listening is going to be guided by comparison to a good sounding reference recording. But does what we're listening to in our comparison sound clear? That's our final step. Does it sound clear? And this is a basic and fundamental judgment of good sound quality, in voice recordings especially. The voice recording needs to sound clear so people can easily hear the message you're trying to get across. And if your voice recording is not sounding clear, what could be the problem? And let's go over some common problem areas. The first one would be EQ issues. That's a very common culprit. This means something needs to be balanced in the frequency spectrum. It could be a big resonance, which a resonance is just an area, could be lows or mids or highs, but an area that's dominating too much of the sound. It's too powerful. So it could be a low, for instance, a low resonance in kind of what they call the mud range that could detract from hearing the mids and the upper frequencies. So that's one EQ issue, or it could just be too much or not enough of the top frequencies or the bottom frequencies or the mid range. You may have just too much low end, which is obscuring the high end frequencies from coming through. Or you may just be lacking, in the top altogether, and that just needs to be brought up. And EQ would be the tool for the job for that. Distortion is another common problem area. It could be that your recording is clipped, causing it not to sound clear. And that just means that your levels went over zero when you're recording, into the red, causing distortion. Or it could be too much saturation when you're processing something. And saturation is just when we add in tasteful bits of distortion to sweeten our recordings, but that can easily be overdone. And so that can create too much distortion, taking away from the clarity. Another issue that we already talked about is that room tone problem, too much room tone, which is the sound of your voice reflecting off the walls in the room, that getting into your recording. And so that's a problem when we're recording in small rooms. Square rooms in our homes typically have this problem. But it can also be a problem anytime you get too far from your microphone, because the microphone is starting to hear your voice bouncing off of those walls more than the direct sound of your voice into the mic. Another problem that takes away from a recording sounding clear is too much sibilance, which you can hear. I have a lot of that in my voice. It's the S's, the S sounds. Too much of those can detract from the clarity of the sound. And plosives are kind of similar to sibilants, except they're in the lower frequencies. They're low frequency bursts of air in certain words that reduce clarity. Another common issue is this random noise like hum, hiss, or buzz. It could be from computer fans, air conditioning systems, refrigerators humming, all kinds of stuff. That's a common problem. So as an example, put your headphones on so you can best hear these kind of subtle differences that I'm going to play. And I'm going to play a voice recording of me that has several of these issues we just mentioned, which is causing it not to sound unclear. So it doesn't sound as clear as it should. It has some EQ resonance problems that we talked about in the low end that are keeping the upper frequencies from coming through clearly. It also has too much background noise, some hiss or computer fan noise. And then there's the sibilants. The S's are just too piercing. So what I'll do is play the voice recording with problems and then the same recording, but adding in fixes to those issues. And as I flip back and forth, see if you can hear how the sound changes and listen to hear how the recording becomes clearer as I fix more of those issues. Okay, so I will start here. This is my raw recording with the problems, and they are all volume matched, so we can make a good comparison. So I'll start with that and then add this one here with a fix. So here we go. Shock or collapse frequently occurs after serious accidents. 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 So, I think you can hear how dealing with some of those common issues can really clean up your voice recording. I think you also might be hearing that in your sleep too. Unfortunately, that was kind of repetitive, but hopefully you can hear how, fixing the EQ issues and noise issues and sibilance issues, some of them get harder to hear. For instance, this one to this one, because the fix was just fixing sibilance. And I don't know if that's probably not as easy to hear, but it did have less sibilance than this one here. But I'm sure you could hear how comparing this one that had 3 different fixes compared to the raw recording up here, I'm sure you could hear how that was a real large difference. It made it sound much more clear dealing with those 3 common issues. And again, if you'd like a helpful guide that will show you how to translate some of these common problems I'm showing you right here that you're going to hear in voice recordings or vocal recordings, to translate them into easy audio fixes, just go to brianhurtaudio.com/guide and grab your free guide today. It should be a very helpful guide for you to start learning how to translating problems you're hearing into easy fixes. Again, that's brianhurtaudio.com/guide for your free voice recording problem-solving guide. To summarize, you start listening in a new way by using your best and most familiar playback setup. Then, you listen by comparing your recording with your reference recording, that you volume matched, of course, and ask, what sounds different between them? And you could write that down. Or what sounds the same? And write that down. And finally, does my recording sound clear? So here's the next simple step you can easily do right now. Just grab your headphones and start listening to good sounding dialogue and music regularly. Or sit down at your preferred speaker setup and start listening to a good sounding podcast. If you need an example, try the Mastering Show podcast, and I'll leave a link down below for that podcast. As you keep listening over time, you'll get used to what good sounding voice recordings and music sounds like on your setup. Then start comparing that with your voice recording or mix. And start listening for those subtle differences between your recording and the reference, and go ahead and write those down. And let me know where you're having difficulty with listening and starting to correct your audio. What's your biggest frustration around these things? Leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube, so I'll know how to help and make more videos. And thanks so much for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you again on the next video.